for any questions or anything. All right. Muting myself. All right, good. So thank you all for joining. And yeah, I just thought this would be a fun way to keep the information flowing and to keep keep us connected and engaged. So I'm really excited to share with you this project that I've been working on for over 4 years now, and it's focused in the Gran Desierto, and it brings a lot of things together, and also has a lot of real current. A lot of really current connections in terms of border questions, hydrology, Colorado River connections, and communications and indigenous partnerships. So, it's very current. So I'm excited to share this with you all. I think what I want to acknowledge right out of the gates is that this is a really remarkably collaborative project. And the work I'm going to be sharing with you is, I had a part in, but it was very much the effort of Hector Zamora, who got his PhD undertaking this research in the geosciences department at the U of A, studying also with Carl Flessa and Jennifer McIntosh, and then myself. And so Hector now works for Tucson Water on continuing to do water research. And then also artist Ben Johnson. Much of the questions and the communications I'm going to be sharing with you now are really emanated through his approach and conversations with him, because this project was part of the 6 and 6 effort. So this is a collaboration through the Next Generation Sonoran Desert researchers, a community of researchers equally spread between the US and Mexico, focused on the larger Sonoran Desert region, over 900 members. And this was the first overt partnership of an effort of that group to really merge art and science, and to do so in a very fundamentally transdisciplinary way. And so we had 12 individuals in 6 different cohorts. So each one was a pairing between an artist and a scientist. And this effort started in, oh goodness, about 2015, and really took its time to develop new questions and new lines of thinking and new collaborative ways to express that. So essentially, in our case, our project, my project with Ben, the two Bens, Ben squared, was the Pozos and these questions. But the art influenced the science questions, and the science influenced the art approaches and questions and communication. Everything was in step, one influencing and inspiring the other. And so that is the context in which this project was undertaken. And I think this really underscores a lot of what we did and where we're at now. So to try to anchor us and to kind of bring us to what part of the world we're talking about, this is the Gran Desierto, the Great Despoblado, the largest extent of sand dunes in North America. So for those that are familiar, this is the Penecate region. I've been able to travel with many of those on the call to that region. And here we are, the international border. This is Rocky Point, Puerto Peñasco. Here is the what makes it into the Colorado River, into the upper Gulf of California. And here's San Luis, and Yuma is just over here. The border crossing into the US, Mexico at Sonoita is just around here. So all of this right in here, that is the Gran Desierto. Everything you see there is sand dunes. And that was once the interior of the Grand Canyon. So essentially, over millions of years, the Colorado River is excavating and pouring out all this sediment and dropping it here at the Delta region. Interestingly enough, though, that these dunes are of relatively recent origin. They really only date back to about 20,000 years or so in their current form as we see them now. So it's kind of remarkable if anyone spent any time there. It's like, wow, it's hard to imagine that much material could be so recently deposited But I think that speaks to the power of water movement as well as wind in the region. But clearly you can look and see, and that is a large dry area. And so fresh water in this region is vitally important, of which there is hardly any. But just around this area on the edge, this is Bahia Dare. I'll be referring to that area a lot through this talk. Just on the edge of that, you see habitats like this. These are the Pozos, the freshwater springs that kind of miraculously occur and in the middle of these sand dunes, and that are the only freshwater in over 50 kilometers in any direction. And the life that gathers there is quite remarkable in itself, especially herons that are just thriving in these days as we're talking now. This is another one of the springs. This is called Tres Ojitos, originally named on one of Kino's expeditions. And you can see there in the background, that's some of the edge of the sand dunes. They support this large diversity of wildlife. And you can see here in the upper corner, that's a bat. I think it's a lesser longnose, is from my identification. Which, if you're familiar with the Penecate at all, there's these large lava tubes that occur in the Penecate region where they have the largest roost of lesser long-nosed bats, Leptonectarus uruguayna, in southern Arizona and northern Mexico, in the northern part of their range. These are pregnant females that are currently traveling north right now, following the blooms of the columnar cacti. And they get from southern Mexico, central southern Mexico, and they arrive in the roost of the Penecate lava tubes in the tens of thousands to have their babies. And we know that they can fly up to 50 kilometers in one night. And it looks like many of them are coming here to drink the water, which was not previously known. Coyotes play an important role in this ecosystem as well. And I'll talk more about the mechanisms of what's happening with the water. But in many places, it's actually the coyotes that are excavating and digging down and digging through the salt flats to allow the water to expose. And here's just a bit of a nice montage of some of the species that you see there and some of the plants and the ibises and so forth. The other really important aspect to mention up at the beginning as we're talking about these sites is the cultural presence at these springs. So as I mentioned, this is the only fresh water in any direction for dozens of miles and kilometers. And water is life in the desert, as we all know. And so what you see in this image here in the foreground is this is a shell midden. These are essentially, they've also been referred to as kitchen middens, which essentially just means that this was a campsite that people were staying for extended period of times, perhaps even year-round, during some years, and were eating this abundant seafood and dropping the refuse here in the dunes. And you can see that is one of the springs right there in the background that has this beautiful cottonwood tree I'll talk more about in a bit. The other vital element of the areas is the salt. So what you get around Bahia Dare are these low-lying salt flats. So essentially these are areas that some are still connected to the highest high tide that occurs in July. The rest of the year is not tidally connected, or in this case at Salina Grande, it is not any longer connected to tidal fluctuations, but you have water, rainwater, fresh water falling in these and then evaporating out and leaving massive extents of salt. You can see here is a close-up zoom. So that salt and these salt flats and springs were the destination of the Tohono O'odham salt pilgrimage for millennia. This is a coming of age ceremony that was undertaken by young men, leaving different spots through the O'odham lands in what is now southern Arizona, and And remember that the O'odham were as a nation with multiple communities, distinct. The Ached O'odham, which are the people that occur in the sandier regions of the desert, closer to we're on the extreme. The Pozos here are kind of on the extreme edge of O'odham land, and so this was a large pilgrimage that was taken. You can see these place names through different routes, through the desert, through the Panacate, edging on the dunes, ending up here at the springs at the edge to gather the salt. So young men would embark on this journey, and they would go with a leader, and they would have a long purification ceremony, and travel, over hundreds. I mean, close to 300 miles in some cases with round trip. Very extensive journeys that would last months or more, and they'd come back as different people. This is a tradition that lasted for millennia, if not centuries, if not millennia, and really went out of being. It was not conducted anymore I'm not sure the exact years, but perhaps on the order of 5 decades or so. So this knowledge, this connection to such a vital part of the region, the O'odham land, was being lost. And you can see this map actually dates to 2015, 2016, and that is squarely from the efforts of this gentleman, Ken Jose Maria. So Ken Jose Maria works for the O'odham government from cells, but I think he actually works in the mechanics section. He's actually a Marine, a veteran, a veteran of the Marines for the United States, and 10 years ago identified that the salt pilgrimage had stopped, and took it upon himself to reinitiate this connection and this effort. And with this gentleman, Rafael Ortega, is leading the salt pilgrimage again for the last 10 years, and they would be out there right now, this moment, that they postponed the salt pilgrimage for this year due to the pandemic concerns. You can see in this image, this is just from 2-3 weeks ago. They are about a month ago. They are collecting ephedra here. As energy pieces, you can see in Ken's hands that they will chew on during the hikes, during the pilgrimage, to keep the energy up, and when they haven't been eating and they're so tired after days on days of eating. This is an image here of just one of the interdune areas, just literally on the other edge. Actually, that ephedra is where Ken and Rafael were collecting the sticks from in this previous image here. So this is just an interdune area over from the salt flats. And everything you see in the foreground here, this is all shell midden material. This is an old campsite that's excavated out. And I want to just kind of give you an example of some of the cultural artifacts that you see in these sites. This is a volcanic gyratory crusher. Essentially, these pieces form together to create a grinding stone, a gyratory crusher for different substances, especially perhaps mesquite or other elements. Interesting non-native rock, in large pottery vessels, arrowhead points, obsidian flakes, and then also you see on the dunes here throughout the area a lot of other material, oysters, cooked oysters. Does anyone can recognize that? That's crab, right? That's the little edge of a crab claw. Pottery, baked crab. And you zoom out and you're walking along on these shell middens, and it's extensive. So this is one of the shell middens that's ringing Bahia there, and it goes on for kilometers this direction with as much density as you see in the foreground there. This is work that's being undertaken right now by actually Jonathan Mabry, who some of you may know, who works at the lab with us, as well as Douglas Mitchell and Paul Shepard. They're just finishing their reconnaissance and initial archaeological excavations under ENA permits to just start to quantify and look at the material that's in these shell middens, both the quantity of what shells and what species, but also the cultural artifacts, the pottery, the obsidian flakes. And they've dated the shell middens to the oldest date is about 6,000 years ago before present. But more than anything, that date connects to when the sea levels were at their current extent. So sea levels reached their present height 6,000 years ago. So it's actually likely that that much of the material, the cultural shell middens, are under the water when sea levels were lower, when much of the world's water was stored in ice sheets. So the sea levels were lower, and that's where people were. And then now all the archaeological material is underwater. This is an image, a map by Carl Lumholtz, who was a great Norwegian explorer who came to the North America. And he first did, if any of you are familiar with his work, Unknown Mexico. He was working in the Sierra Madre with the Tarahumara and spent over 10 years in his incredible book, Unknown Mexico, published, that details his journeys there. In 1909 and 1910, he did a year's expedition in the Pimeria Alta, the our region. And that's documented in this book, New Trails in Mexico, which if any of you have not read that, it is absolutely fantastic. It's out of copyright, so just Google New Trails in Mexico, Carl Lumholtz, Google Books, and you can download the entire book for free. Man, you got nothing else to do. Read that book. It's great. Really incredible explorer and naturalist. So he did this wonderful journey throughout the desert, and you can see the red lines here as his maps. I want to zoom in here on the area we're focusing on. And this was a journey that he did throughout the region. I also just want to point out that this is the Bahia del region, which is a fascinating geomorphological feature. And it's an estuary, but it's a negative estuary. There's no fresh water coming in. And on the edge of it, you see Salina, right? These are the different, Salina Grande, these are the different salt flats where the freshwater springs are popping up through. I also just wanted to point out that you see here on the edges, the dunes, that's where those shell middens that I was just showing you are. They run the whole thing. So I just kind of want to pause actually and think about this environment 100 years ago even, and then go back as far as you want, 13,000 years, 10,000 years. So this was one of the most productive spots on our planet. You had the Colorado River, which is with all of its fresh water and resources and nutrients pouring into the upper Gulf, which in itself is an incredibly productive environment. So if anyone has read Aldo Leopold's description of the delta, the Colorado River Delta in San County Almanac, it's just this unbelievable landscape of riparian vegetation. It was even the land of jaguars and alligators. The northernmost occurrence of alligators occurred in the delta. So you had these absolute teeming, abundant ecosystem. And the only limit for people to the current in the site is water. But you had the fresh water. You had the food, you had the fresh water, you had people. And so the presence of people in this region has been vastly overlooked. And if you're interested in more thinking of that, some of the work and writing by Julian Hayden, and he's a great archaeologist in the region, points to that presence. So this is some of the images that were captured by Carl Lumholtz on his journey. I love this picture. This is called a site called Tornial. I'll show you on the map here, Campo Tornial. Tornial is the name for the screw bean mesquite, which occurs in the region of these wetland habitats. And you have a freshwater spring, that's fresh water, right, that is occurring underneath the high tide line. So this is a spot where his horses were able to disencamp and are drinking the fresh water at a time when you get the tide. All of you that have been to Penasco, you know the tidal fluctuations in this part of the Gulf are dramatic. Some of the highest tidal fluctuations of anywhere in the world, on the order of 24 feet in one tidal cycle. And so all that tidal water goes way out, and you get these incredible pockets of fresh water. They're very rare, but you do get them in the area. This is one of the springs at Salina Grande. This is the Lumholtz images from 1910. And then we were able to match them and show you the image from today. I'll just go back and do that one more time. You can see Carl's horses there, in this hilltop, and those screw beam mesquites, and dropping down to the image just 2 years ago. Remarkably stable, even to the point where I want to make those exact same screw beam mesquite stems. But I mean, some change has to happen over 100 years. Here's another image from that little sand dune edge, looking into the Salina flat of that same spring there. And again, matched with the image today. And there's Hector walking. Remarkable stability. One more image that shows the much of Salina Grande. This is again the larger salt flat, the edge of Bahia there. With the image today, you do see some palms that have come in, Washingtonia, which is an interesting thing, but for by and large, very similar. Another thing just to note that you can see pretty well in this image is you can kind of see how these springs are in a line, right? Going in this, trending in this direction. Here's the Sierra Penacate in the distance. That is due, and I'll talk much more about this in a bit, to faults. So essentially you have faults right over the geological rift zone. So we have one set of a kind of ground, earth moving in a relatively in a different direction, up, down, forward, backward, relative to another point. And it's a structure, it's a weak fracture zone that allows the differential movement of pieces of earth. In this case, what you have is these smaller faults that are running on either side of the salt flat that have allowed that whole area to drop down. That is why that salt flat is there. It is at a lower elevation than the surrounding areas because of these faults that kind of dropped it down. And then you're getting the water flowing along that zone of penetration, that fracture zone. And that's where you get the springs occurring. That's a theme I'm going to revisit later. But for now, I wanted to focus in a little bit on what is it that Lumholtz came across when he was there in 1910. I just want to read this quote, which I think really captures what's so unique about these pozos. One of these pozos was still further out, actually in the salt bed, where the soft salt cover became more solid. Here, the water was perfectly fresh. An extraordinary feature of these formations was that water actually may be found on top of the sand heap in the middle. Climbing up one of them, which was usually high, about 10 feet, I found that a coyote had scratched a hole 4 feet above the depression, and this was filled with water. Likewise, when he was talking about an adjacent area, the Sierra del Rosario, which is a granitic mountain range in the middle of the sand dunes, I think this is an important quote, too, that just kind of puts the importance of fresh water in context. There's no mountain range nearer, that is to the Salinas, than the isolated Sierra del Rosario, 35 miles to the north. Sand dunes are still characteristic of the country for miles further on. It seems as if the presence of so much fresh water here must presuppose its existence underneath the western area of the desert of the district of Altar and extending perhaps up into southern Arizona. So our knowledge of what was the status of this fresh water coming in these springs was been kind of a bit of a wecko, a hole, a gap in understanding for many, many years. And there was a huge gap, honestly, from Lumholtz's time. Larry May, a PhD student at the University of Arizona in the 70s, did some work on that, but we didn't know much until the work of Richard Felger and Ezequiel Escura in 1989. And this, if any of you are familiar with the journal Desert Plants, it's done out of the Boys Thompson Arboretum. For us botanists, desert botanists, it's like a little treasure of gold. There's some incredible publications that have come out of there. And in this one, they did freshwater islands in the desert sand sea, the hydrology and flora of the Gran Desierto oases. And so these are the different pozos that they sampled here on the edge of Bahia Adera. Now, what they worked on, so this is that one of those spring mounds that's just like Lumholtz described, right? So you climb up here 10 feet above the surrounding salt and sand, and there you are, you put your hand down and there's fresh water just being pulled up by the vegetation. And that's this vegetation mound that has been grown on, you know, for thousands of years. You get up 10 feet high because you just have this vegetation that's growing on top of itself. This is Anemopsis californica, which is a great herbal medicinal plant, and then the populus, the cottonwood. So the work that Ezekiel and Richard did showed that though their work was essentially putting forth the hypothesis that this is local recharge from winter rainwater. And so the hypothesis they put forward is that you have winter rain that comes throughout the region, especially the Penecate volcanic shield, right? Here's the Penecate volcanic shield. And the water comes off, percolates, infiltrates the dunes, and then comes down and follows these pathways to the springs. And what the mechanisms that's creating the springs is artesian pressure. So essentially what that means is that you've got this water body, this aquifer under the dunes. And then gravity is you go towards the coast, water's going down slope, and then you hit this impermeable clay layer as you get to the coast. So all that water body is starting to get constrained as you get this clay layer, and then you're getting smaller, and so you're getting pressure because that water's in a much smaller area. Then you get these salt flats, which is the thinnest layers of essentially where that water can break through due to that pressure, that artesian pressure. And that's where the coyotes come in, is that they're digging, smelling the water, and create these openings through the salt flats where the fresh water can emerge through. So that's the local recharge is the way they're thinking. And the other thing they documented is the really unique flora that occurs at these pozos. So they documented a flora of 23 species, the vast majority of which do not occur anywhere else in the Gran Desierto. They are they're riparian species that require the fresh water. And interestingly, they are all relictual of what was the Delta region. So when you think about the Delta, that riparian system, that was so vast, I mean, and unimaginable on the scale today. But there's almost none of it left because all that faucet was turned off with the dams and the groundwater pumping, the allocation to cities like our own. So that vegetation doesn't really exist except at these very small parts in the deltas, including the Ciénaga de Santa Clara, as well as these springs, at these springs. So you can see Anemopsis, scrubby mesquite, Phragmites, the reed grass, again, scrubby mesquite, Nitrophylla, which is a really interesting obligate freshwater species, the cottonwoods, and some halophytes, as well as sand food, if anyone's familiar with that. Philisma sonora, an incredible food species that was this tuber were used for food by the O'odham, especially the Achsed O'odham. All right, major questions still remain though. How old is this water, and really what is its origin? Is it actually local recharge water that's coming from winter rain? We didn't know, and so that's where our project jumped in. So I just want to, again, set the scene for everybody. So this is the watershed that we're focusing in. Here is the Gila River coming in from New Mexico and Arizona. Colorado River coming down from the north, U.S.-Mexico border. You've got the Colorado River. And then here is Bahia Adair, and this is the area where the springs are that we're interested in. Penecate volcanic shield. Two really important kind of mechanistic pieces here are the two faults in the system. You have the Cerro Prieto fault, which runs pretty much right along the edge of the Gulf. And then you have the Altar fault, which runs right underneath the dunes, terminating in the Bahia Adair area. This is an image that shows all of the wells, the ground pumping, the water pumping wells going into the underground aquifer. The ones in red are in Mexico, the ones in yellow are in the US, and that's a lot of wells. It's kind of overwhelming, actually. And this is, of course, feeding the incredible agricultural breadbasket of the Yuma area and San Luis area. And so this well field here, the San Luis well field, which I'll be referring to, I figured it's run by Conagua, the Mexican government. And we went over to those pumps, and And the amount of water they're pulling from depth is astronomical. Giant tubes, I mean, you know, about 1 meter in diameter, just water pouring forth 24/7, feeding the agricultural fields, and as well as feeding Mexicali, which is a very large city in northern Baja California, just a little bit to the west of here, with I think over 1 million people now. Some of this water also goes to Tijuana. But you can see there are relatively few wells in other parts as you get away from the agricultural valleys. These are some ranches that kind of spot along Highway 2, which is just below the US-Mexico border. So what we were doing is we were doing stable isotope analysis. So how we got it, the question of how old the water is and what is its origin, is using stable isotopes. It's chemistry, it's analytical chemistry, and it's a little complicated, but I think the best way to describe it is it's like a whodunit. You're looking for signatures. So water has a signature. And what I mean by that is that the ratio of these two stable isotopes, oxygen and hydrogen, those have, so right, isotope, right, is a different number of neutrons in the atoms, and so they have differential weights, and so when it rains or evaporates, you have different fractionation. So essentially what that means is that different sources of water have a different ratio of these two elements. And so you do analytical chemistry of these two elements of all your potential water sources, and you're looking for differential signatures. So essentially what we did is we went out throughout the entire region and collected samples. So this is Hector taking his data, and this is a great Ejidatario Marco Polo who lives in the dunes. We had some adventures with mud. Don't show that to the UV motor pool. We had a lot of samples that we collected throughout the area. And this is essentially what our sampling scheme looked like. And again, the reason is we're trying to understand what is the source of the brown triangles. What do these brown triangles look like? So I say it's like a game of Clue, right? You're trying to identify all the possible culprits. And then you get a signature of each one of them. So what does Cienega de Santa Clara water look like? What does this water that comes from the wells being pumped up in the San Luis agricultural area look like? What does Gila River water look like? What does local recharge from rain look like in the Penacatu region? What is what does rainfall in summer look like? So we took, I think it was close to 80 different samples through the entire region to try to get at that. So jump into the results here. How old is that water? Really old. So this is an image showing carbon-14 ages. So again, carbon-14 is an unstable isotope that has a decay rate that has a very known amount. So if you're familiar with Packrat-Midden analysis or other dating techniques, you can use radiocarbon. You can do that for water as well. So samples that have very little radiocarbon, C14, left in them are very old. And so this is essentially showing that some of this water from the Pozos themselves, the oldest date we got was about 17,000 years old. Most on average were about closer to between 8,000 to 5,000 years old. Some of the water that here is in the El Doctor Pozos, these are also freshwater springs that come out on the Cerro Prieto fault that I was showing you. They are even older, closer to 20,000, 30,000 years old. Another way to get at age of water is an element called tritium, which is an isotope called tritium, which essentially, again, it decays at a much slower rate than carbon-14, so it's better for dating older water. Very little amounts of tritium mean very old water. So you can see this value of 5 right here along the Colorado River, much more recent, kind of almost modern water. And then you see these values of 0.16, 0.1, 0.08, 0.1, very old water. So it gives us a lot of confidence in those radiocarbon dates. So fossil water, takeaway number 1. Getting towards takeaway number 2. Where the heck is this water coming from in the springs? So the first thing we wanted to understand is what is this winter rainfall? What does winter rainfall look like? So again, I'm going to show you a lot of graphs here. Bear with me. They're going to look complicated, but I'm going to walk you through them, and it's not too bad. So you have these two axes, right? Here's your oxygen isotope, and here's your hydrogen isotope. So that's just a standard plot because you have the differential ratios, right, of these different signatures. So you're seeing where the water falls out between those two, on those two axes. In this case, what we're looking for is water, just essentially annual water, winter rainfall, or summer rainfall. By water, I meant rainfall. And then local recharge. And then seawater is your standard. So long story short, this is what local recharge is. This is what the water in the region is. And you can see that it is most closely connected to winter rainfall. So that holds with our hypothesis that the local recharge is being driven by winter rain. For those of us that are kind of familiar with this part of the Gran Desierto, that totally makes sense, right? You get your colder, kind of Pacific, jet stream winter storms that drop and just kind of gently have water that infiltrates and get into the water table, where your summer rain is a lot more rare, as well as just kind of a runoff into the washes and goes out and doesn't settle in as much. Okay, so is that in fact what we're seeing? Is the winter rain, is that local recharge what we're seeing in the Pozos? This is the plotting of all of our results. It's the exact same plot on the same ratio, on the same axis as before. And up here is your little legend. That's where all the different sources of the water are. So again, our ones of main interest are Bahia there, the brown triangles, which are here. So, okay, so first off, this line right here is essentially Colorado River water. The dashed part is what an evaporation trend line looks like. So that's evaporated Colorado River water. This dark line here is essentially global meteorological water line. That's just essentially rainfall. So the first thing to show is that I'm going to zoom in here. This is just a zoom in on that exact same plot. This right here, that open triangle, that is what winter rainfall looks. You see this blue triangle here? I'm going to go back real quick to this map. See that blue triangle, number 14? That's our sample of what local runoff of that's a well on the edge of the Penacate shield volcano. So essentially, if this is indeed just local recharge water coming off the Penacate, we expect that blue triangle to fit right on top of these brown triangles. And they're totally different. So the first answer is that this is not local recharge. This is not from winter rain that's just coming down into the Pozos. So where the heck is it coming from? Well, you see this black hash kind of cross here. That's the Cienega water, the Cienega de Santa Clara, Colorado River water. And you go along that, the green triangles are the Sierra Prieto Pozos. Remember those really old water right here, following that fault? Colorado River water. And then here you get the Pozos that we're interested in are off of that trend line of Colorado River water, but they're very connected. They're much more connected to this than they are local rainwater. Essentially, what is happening is that you're getting some saltwater mixing happening here. And this next figure shows you that. This is that same plot, exact same, and this is what you would have, see that little triangle here, seawater. So this is what a mixing trend line looks like if you're mixing fresh water with seawater. And you expect essentially the plot of the water we're looking at is falling right in that area. Another way to look at that is this a bromide chlorine plot. The only takeaway here is that you're looking at salinity, and that you get very seawater dilution, very saline waters fall along this line, and you can see all of our waters are trying to tend towards that side. So the bottom line here is that it's ancient water, takeaway number one. Takeaway number two, it's evaporated Colorado River water. So the mechanism that we're describing here, what our results are suggesting, is that you had we're going back about 20,000 years ago. You had the Colorado River flowing, and you had this kind of interesting wetland up in the San Luis, Yuma area, where you would just have this water, kind of thinking of a big delta, marshy delta, and you have this fresh water from the Colorado River sinking in and evaporating at that time. So remember that evaporative trend line we saw. So you have evaporating fresh Colorado River water sinking into the aquifer under the dunes, and then following these faults. And in particular, the Altar fault here. Following that fault line, because remember, it's a suture zone. That's where you have this porous area where water gets in nooks and crannies and follows it down, and following it underneath in the aquifer to the terminus here at Bahia Dare. So it's like a conveyor belt you can think of underneath the dunes of taking this water, this aquifer, to the dunes. That's where the source is. Taking that a step further is this image, is what the heck is Bahia Dare in the first place? And it's been long speculated that that is the ancient delta of the Colorado River. And it's the exact same mechanism we're talking about. So you have the proposed ancient course of the Colorado River following that Altar fault and terminating in Bahia Dare. So essentially what we're proposing is that you have all that alluvium and that cobble underneath the dunes along this fault. And essentially the aquifer, the Pozos water, is following that old path of the river, but underneath the dunes and terminating in the Pozos. And that's how it's getting there. These numbers here are not, it's not topography, it's a gravimetric figure. So essentially it's really interesting, and we are not conclusively saying that this is the old path of the Colorado River and that the Bahia Dare is indeed the ancient delta, but our data sure supports that. So again, two takeaways. Ancient water and it's Colorado River water. That's what's coming up in the springs. So which is really important. I mean, this water is even more important than we maybe speculated at the beginning. Circling back now a little bit, so we had the show. I remember I was telling you about the 6 and 6, the art science show. This is our presentation, part of the show at the University Museum of Art that was physically in the space a year ago right now. And this is Ben Johnson's painting of the Alamo, of the Pozos Springs, amazing triptych that's just larger than life, combined with some botanical specimens and some videos. It's just a really beautiful capturing of what I'm talking about. I also want to take a little bit of time here and talk about conservation. So, okay, what are our results mean? What is the importance of this in the big picture of things? Well, now things also get a little complicated. So this map I'm showing you right now, this is the reserve boundaries of the Alto Golfo de California Biosphere Reserve. This is a Mexican federally protected, national protected area. And it was established in 1993 in tandem with the Penacate Biosphere Reserve. So the Penacate Biosphere Reserve is here in the brown. Everything in color here is the Alto Golfo. So what is the first thing that you guys think about conservation-minded when you think about the upper Gulf of California right now? Vaquita and Colorado River water. So you see this light blue. Okay, I'm back. That is the Vaquita Refuge. And then the green is the delta. It's a little complicated to see, but here's the coastline, and here is the Salina Grande and whatnot. I'm not gonna make you read that little legend down there, but you see these little red boxes here, all those? That means aprovechamiento especial, which means special use, which means loophole, which means you can do whatever the heck you want in those zones within a protected area, which means major lobbying pressure was at play in the early 1990s that allowed people to extract the salt for commercial gains. And none of the cultural information or the biology, what I'm telling you, was known at that time, and none of that cultural information was put to forth. So essentially, what has happened is that you have permits for the extraction of the salt from these salt flats that have been able to continue to go on. There was a lot of extractive industries in the 80s, which then was with that force that came to be in the 90s, early 90s when they made the decree. Very high political pressure. And that was recently renewed about 5 years ago for renewed salt mining here. And this is an image about 3 years ago taken of that effort. You can see here, again, carving off the salt and taking away to measure. There's been a huge uproar about this, largely led by the O'odham in the US, in Arizona, as well as the O'odham in Sonora. You can see here, there's Ken Jose Maria. And the other important thing you see is this. You see the picture of this individual right here and there. That's Señor Jose Bolaños. Señor Bolaños is the ejidatario. So again, another layer of complication, but a very important point, is land tenureship in Mexico is not the same in the US. There's a whole other layer of land tenureship in Mexico, which is called the ejido, which essentially is communal land. After the Mexican Revolution of about 1910, 1915, that time period, there was the complete restructuring of land ownership in Mexico, taking out of the hacienda, large property, 1% of the 1% control by very few people of all of Mexico. That land was taken and given to the community, and these forms of ejidos. So each ejido throughout the entire country is communally managed and owned. Now that goes forward to current time, and you have much of Mexico's land tenure still in these ejido structures. Señor Bolaños is the ejidatario. He is the singular individual that's a member of the consejo, the different, there's about a select group of people who manage those lands, and Bolaños is the head of that. He is an incredible individual. He single-handedly has maintained the preservation and is fighting for the preservations of these sites. He understands their biological importance. He even more so understands the cultural importance, and has been fighting against these concessions for the salt mining in a very unilateral and often disenfranchised way. And I can go into more details if people want to get into the dirty details of what's happening. But he's asking for help. And so I've been communicating the results I'm sharing with you tonight to as many people as I possibly can, including very high-level individuals in the Mexican government, as well as the leadership of the Tohono O'odham in Arizona. And so I gave multiple presentations, including to the Legislative Council in as recent as February. And upon that presentation in February, it was decided that there would be a formal O'odham delegation to visit the salt springs to make these connections. And I'm so pleased to say that happened on March 20th. And this is, and myself, I was so fortunate to be able to accompany these individuals. This is Chairman Ned Norris, Chairman of the O'odham Nation. This is Arthur Wilson, Head of the Cultural Committee. Many of you may recognize, I hope you were able to see and to participate and to see his lecture that he gave at the Desert Laboratory. This is Lorraine Eiler. There's Gary Nabhan, some of you recognize. Ken Jose Maria. This individual is the O'odham leader from Sonora. And many other really important people in this picture, again with Señor Jose Bolaños, the ejidatario. So this was a remarkable day of sharing and connecting many different ways of seeing the landscape here and the importance of the landscape. Here's again the picture of Chairman Norris and Ken Jose Maria walking on that shell mitt and seeing the presence of people of their direct they are direct descendants of the people that were from that left those shells. So the cultural connection is so strong and so important on so many layers, and we were able to make those to re-establish those connections. For many of the individuals in this photo, this was their first time there. As Chairman Norris shared, I've never been here before. I'm here to listen and to learn and to connect about this space. And then that's what we focused on. Getting back into this kind of conservation landscape here, and just to kind of tell you how current this conversation is, there is a lot of pressure on Mexico internationally to do something about the vaquita. And if any of you participated in the lecture series we had on the vaquita at the Desert Lab, you know how complicated of a story that is. The vaquita is an endangered, critically endangered porpoise, cetacean, small dolphin, endemic, only occurring right in this region of the upper Gulf of California, that unfortunately may very well go extinct. The Gulf of California is a United Nations World Heritage Site. That designation is in jeopardy due to the vaquita's imminent extinction. So there's a lot of pressure for Mexico to address this problem, which is going to require the opening and the modification of the management plan. That also allows us to take a new look at what is currently zoned as special use and to maybe think about actually how critically important these habitats are and to make a fundamental change in the conservation structure. This is possible. This is happening now. And these are the conversations we're having. And this is the conversations we had together at the site, bringing the O'odham perspective with the Hidetario perspective with what I was able to share in the 5 years that I've been able to work in this region and the kind of the scientific studies and the artistic perspective, bringing together, again, a sharing of energies and how truly remarkable and important these sites are. So I want to just end with a video that I think can be as a beautiful kind of closing of the reflective, the reflections of how important this space is. So this is a video that Ben Johnson made, and it's going to start with this image of Carl Lumholtz, taken in 1910, it's the one I showed earlier. And then it segues into a time lapse of a 24-hour view taken just about 2 years ago, matched from the exact same part in just 24 hours view of what that site is today. You'll notice, very interestingly, right in the background, there's a new coastal highway that goes right along the area. And so an area that used to take, oh my goodness, weeks to get to, or on foot or by horseback, you can now just drive to it. And people are just driving by on this highway, not knowing these sites even exist. And I think it's an important reflection on our relationship with water in the current culture, and also our relationship with how these sites, how our relationship with these sites has changed over the years.
Okay, Ben, we're not seeing video, and we can hear, but we're not seeing any change. We've got several comments. Nobody's seeing anything.
Oh my God, you
Only
guys are
hearing.
so patient.
I texted you and messaged you, but decided to open.
Thank you for interrupting. You guys are hilarious. Okay, let me fix. Thank you. I'm like, God, this is beautiful. Okay, I'm gonna change it. All right, you guys, you bearing with me? You ready to see it? All right. Can you see it now?
We can see it. Don't see movement yet.
Okay, that's fine. It will come. All right. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Okay, now we can see the sky changing. Okay, folks, pay attention. This is subtle.
All right. Hmm. So thank you all. Appreciate you joining us this evening, and I'm happy to take any questions or anything that you may want to say.
Well, that was neat. I have to say it um, was a real change of thinking for me because I grew up around Cape Cod, which is basically a big sand dune. So it's a sand ecosystem as well. And all the water there is just freshwater lenses. It doesn't flow. It's rainfall that pools and makes a few ponds in glacial moraines. So it's pools, isolated pools like this, but they're stationary. They don't come from underground water moving from here to there. So very neat, very different.
Okay.
Ben, this is Trika. I had two questions.
Sure.
One was you were saying that UNESCO is in jeopardy because of the endangerment of
The
vaquita.
World Heritage Designation, yeah.
Could you explain why?
Yeah, essentially the UNESCO World Heritage Site, so UNESCO as a body, there's a whole bunch of, it's an international body that meets, I think it's every year, maybe every other year, or in some periodicity, in which they nominate new sites or value others. And there's also a whole category of sites that are in jeopardy or sites in danger, and also sites that could become delisted based on bad practices or negligence. And essentially, the international body has listed the Gulf of California as a site in jeopardy, a World Heritage Site in jeopardy, that saying there are certain steps that need to be taken to address the issues that are jeopardizing the core. So there are all these criteria that list a site. And in this case, the endemic species are one of them, and the management of them. And so UNESCO is saying you got to get a handle on how you're managing the totoaba and the vaquita and the fishermen within that. And you need to make changes to the management plan to do so. And if you don't do that, we may delist this.
And wasn't originally designated what it is because of the endangered vaquita. So
that was one of the criteria.
Gotcha. Can I ask my other question right now too?
Yeah.
And that is, so regular seawater is 33 parts per thousand. Mm-hmm. I was curious, do you know the salinity of those pozos? And is it is the salinity closer, as your graphs would suggest, closer to seawater, or do you know the salinity of those anyway?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know the number off the top of my head. That's a Hector question. But I do know that ballpark-wise, it is way less saline than seawater. I mean, I have my little Pozos water right here. I want to taste it right now. And when I've tasted it before, I mean, you can't even taste the salt water. It's on a human taste level. It's pretty insignificant, but it's there in the chemistry.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
You all are off mute. If anybody else had a question, well, some of you have muted yourselves. But
Mary, I think I saw your hand got raised.
Yeah, I have a question. So I'm trying to wrap my mind around water being old.
Mm-hmm.
And so that you've concluded that the water is ancient and that it came from the Colorado River. Does that mean it's not like really getting recharged anymore? It's like still the same water there that it was there 20,000 years ago?
Yes.
So it's not really coming in anymore. So is there a possibility of it like drying up?
Yes, major concern.
Okay.
Yes, no, you're spot on. Yes. So the faucet in this case is turned off. The water that's entering that system, the Cienega de Santa Clara for now, because it's like very, very little amount of fresh water comes. I mean, percentage-wise, I think you're talking 0.001% of what used to be there. And so there is no, the water that is coming in is often highly charged with chemicals and just kind of agricultural runoff. But any of the water that is coming, that minus the water that's not, so the water that's not coming in, then you've also got the water that's being pumped out. So yeah, you've got a two-headed, a double barrel challenge there, and without inputs coming in. So the forecast of the long-term future of the Pozos is really bleak, honestly, because you nailed it. The mechanisms that create that were the source from that water have been discontinued.
So now the photos that were taken, what, like 100 years ago?
Yeah.
Those seem pretty much very similar to the water, like the photos that we're seeing now, which is
That's
one of
right.
the points you were making. Is it because 100 years in the grand scheme of things is not that much time that we're not seeing much of a difference? Like, do you think that when there was water getting recharged, there was more?
Not so everything up until that last point. So the 100 years is not a very long time in the scheme of things, in the sense that there's a long residence time for that water in the system. So it's going to take a long time. How long, we have no idea, for the effect of the cessation of new waters and the groundwater pumping. We don't know how long it's going to take for those actions to reach the Pozos at the end of the stream, at the end of the flow. And that's one of the things we're watching. We're monitoring. This is our baseline of which to monitor future change. Unfortunately, I don't know what the heck we're going to be able to do to address the causation of those groundwater pumpings. It's those are huge, socio-political, massive international policy questions, but ones that I think can be addressed. If we're doing the pulse flow in the delta, that's restoring fresh water, and to mimic the seasonal rains or floods that would happen. I think there's a model there for trying to restore fresh water in some way here. But we don't know how long the residence time is, and it could be centuries.
How does salt mining impact those Pozos?
Yeah, so it's a couple different things. So currently the salt mining is not happening on any of the salt flats that actually have Pozos, which is a really good thing. It's one flat that's closest to the ocean that is not as sensitive. I think there's a lot of different ways. So there's first off, there's the cultural degradation of the salt flats. So that's just a cultural, oh man.
Right, it's an insult, so to speak.
An affront to the cultural traditions of the O'odham. So taking that salt in the first place. Then there is the heavy machinery and the impact of people in that area on such a sensitive area that are affecting the archaeological sites too. And 3, the impact on the wildlife, which is definitely negative. And 4, if you're doing this heavy machinery eventually on salt flats to have these Pozos, it's a sensitive hydrological system, and we don't know what direct impact that can have.
Right. Yeah.
But I'd say the archaeology, culture, and wildlife are some of the most immediate effects.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Wow.
All right.
Are there fish in those Pozos?
No.
There must be herons there. There's something.
I know, not that we've seen yet. I think we're pretty confident there are not fish. That would be a showstopper. That would be pretty incredible if there are fish. No, there's a lot of aquatic insect diversity. And that's one of the next studies. Actually, we think that within the plants, I was mentioning, it's an interesting story of regionally they're unique, but you're not getting a difference in like islands, right? So one Pozos has different plant species, new to science. So where we think the diversity story is going to be is in the aquatic insects.
Uh-huh.
And that we had that studies those are just going on right now.
So if I remember rightly, I think desert pupfish were pretty widespread. And of course, their range is contracted, but those herons have to be eating something, and those are great blues, which are big birds.
Uh-huh.
So I wonder.
You never know. I mean,
Yeah.
very possible. Yeah.
That's a good point. But remember, they're also not very far from the coast.
Mhm.
True.
Really
True.
close to the coast where they can fish. And then at these pozos, there's vegetation where they can also nest.
Well, that cottonwood is a heron ring. So the Alamo, that is loaded with nests, and I mean, over 24 nests.
Wow.
And they're on them right now. And
Uh-huh.
then when the chicks hatch, oh, that's a racket! Oh my God, you're not getting any sleep around there. It's wild.
And I had a question regarding the yerba mansa there you mentioned. That is such a ganga of the very well-known medicinal herb, yerba mansa. There you go. Thank you. Do you know, does anyone from any of the nearby, like San Luis, Rio Colorado, or someplace close by, does anyone come there to actually collect yerba mansa?
Such a good question. It seems that the knowledge of and the use of this site as a gathering site for yerba mansa has discontinued. In Lumholtz's account, he has this great accounting of his guides loading up their horses with so many. It's a tuber, right? For those that don't know it, there's a tuber. You just can smell the leaves. It's got this most medicinal smell. It's a cure-all for everything. I mean, it's a magic plant. And they're loading their horses with so much tubers. The damn horses can barely walk, and having to drag them back because they're going to be able to sell the mansa into the town. So, but no, I mean, I'm not aware. There's no evidence of much harvesting of it. Maybe at a very little amount. We talked about it with the O'odham. Those that were with us were not aware of that species or much of the current uses of it. So I'm not aware of current harvesting of it. Is there a genius song? Well, I'm just looking at the chat box, so sorry if I missed something. Oh, yes, it does smell good. Okay, yeah.
I don't see any other questions, just a few comments from previously in the chat box, and I don't see any more hands up. Any other questions? Again, you can just speak up, unmute yourself if you're not unmuted, or send up a blue raise your hand thing.
What do the members of the ejido do for a living? Is it in any conflict with the Pozos, or?
No, good question. So many of the ejidos, so for example, Senor Bolaños lives in Mexicali, so many of them don't live in the area anymore, but they actually have so the old salt mining efforts that I mentioned that were in like the 70s, 60s, 70s, they had a kind of a barracks, like a bunkhouses is a good term. In the Bolaños and Ejidatarios repurposed those and turned the whole thing into an Airbnb. And so I kid you not, you can go on Airbnb, I think type Salina Grande or La Salina, and you can rent a room. Oh my God, I've seen the most interesting characters there that just want to get away from everything. There. And so they're using those profits to help conserve the site. So there's, but yeah, the majority of the Ejidatario is not based there. There's the long Bahia there, I think there's about 4 or 5 ejidos. And this is also an area in other more remote parts of Bahia there that are major importance for drug trafficking. You're able to get boats up way in the estuary, pick up planes. I mean, there's a lot of traffic moving through that area.
Mm. So it sounds like it's sort of a sentimental attachment to that area, but the people of the ejido aren't really there in any commercial way right now.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And even before Airbnb was a popular thing, I think it was at least 10 years ago when I was traveling in the region, one of the Pozos areas, they were turning it into a ecotourism site. That's probably one that is now one of the Airbnbs.
The same thing, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, you may be referring to something that's closer to Penasco.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. This was pretty far north on the way to Santa
Okay.
Cruz.
Well, there's another effort near Penasco, and I forget the gentleman's name that's doing an ecotourism effort that I don't know of personally, but many people have mentioned to me.
Too long ago for me to really remember, but I mean, that is honestly in a group like this for us to keep in mind that these are really interesting places to visit and worth keeping in mind for future.
4 hours away.
Yeah.
I went to this place that I think that you're speaking about a couple years ago. The Desert Museum ran a trip, Black Lava and White Sand. And one of the trips, as part of the whole trip, was to this ecotourism area where they have rooms, and we had a lunch there. And then we walked all around and saw various areas, the shell middens and where the freshwater was. And I think actually the family that was running it was from Oaxaca.
Yeah, so I think you're talking about the exact same spot, and the Native Plant Society did do a trip there. Yeah, so there's Carlos is one of the individuals. So these are individuals that Senor Bolaños brought up from Oaxaca, right? That they're the caretakers. They're running this site for.
Yeah. So it was a very nice place. Very, very, very nice.
So Joan, that might be different from the place that I was at, because it wouldn't be classified as a really nice place. It was pretty rustic. I mean, beautiful natural history and all, but in terms of the accommodations, it was pretty rustic.
Yeah, well, I didn't really see the rooms, but everything about it seemed very well cared for and in pretty good shape, what I saw.
Yeah, let's just say I always opt to camp when I go. I like camping.
It may have to be a future desert lab trip.
Easy. Yeah, that would be a great one. Absolutely. Oh man, there's so much to see in that area.
Oh, it's wonderful.
All right, you all. Well, thank you. Thanks for joining. This was fun.
Yeah, great talk, Ben. Thank you.
Thanks.
That's really great.
You're so welcome.
Yeah.
And don't forget, stewards, we have next Monday, and we'll send information about that.
Okay.
Is that at 12:30, Trika?
5:30, I
Actually,
believe.
no, it's at 5:30, and Barbara will be happy to send you the link as well.
Okay, 5:30.